Hello, Urban Saints. It's good to be reading you another story. Today's story is called The Helpful Servant. Naaman was a soldier. Not just any soldier, but the commander of the whole Syrian army. He was a very powerful man, but he was afraid. Naaman, you see, was ill, and no one knew how to make him well. His skin was covered with sores, and he couldn't feel his fingers or his feet. Everyone felt sorry for him, and God felt sorry too. So God whispered to a little girl who had been captured by Naaman's army and carried away from God's promised land. She worked for Naaman's wife, and one day she said to her mistress, "Back in Israel, where I come from, there lives a man called Elisha. God uses him to make sick people well. If only Naaman could go and see him." And before long, the great soldier who had fought against God's people was off to seek help from God's prophet. Naaman didn't go alone. He took his servants and his horses and a chariot full of treasure to reward Elisha in case his cure should work. It was a grand parade, and Naaman expected a grand greeting in return. But when he sent one of his men to knock on Elisha's door, the prophet did not even answer. Instead, he told his servant Gehazi to say, "If you want to be well, go and dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River." Now, it may be that Naaman was tired and frustrated, or it may be simply that he was proud. Whatever the reason, the prophet's message made him angry. "The Jordan River," he shouted, "it's filthy! I'll throw myself into any river back in Syria, but I will not stick one toe in the Jordan or take the advice of a man who cannot even be bothered to meet me." Begging your pardon, sir," mumbled one of Naaman's servants. But if the prophet had sent you off to do something hard, you would have gone straight away, wouldn't you?" "Of course," grunted Naaman. "Any soldier would." Well then, why can't you just go and do something easy, like washing in the river? It can't hurt, and it might just work." Naaman sighed. "All right," and led his men to the river. He dipped himself twice. Nothing. He dunked himself twice more, up to 4 times now, but his skin was ugly as ever. Twice more, up to 6 times, but he still was no cure. He was getting angry again. But do you know what? When he came up for the 7th time, spluttering and shaking the water from his face, Naaman's men let out a cheer. Naaman opened his eyes and looked at his hands. The sores were gone from all over his body. Naaman quickly dressed and hurried back to Elisha's house. The prophet himself answered the door this time, and Naaman couldn't contain his joy. "Take this treasure, take it all," said Naaman. "Please, for you have saved my life." But Elisha said no, for it was God, after all, who had healed Naaman. said Naaman, scooping up a pile of earth. "Let me take this with me, so that I can stand on a piece of your land and worship your God too." Elisha nodded and smiled. And God smiled too, for with a little girl and a muddy river, he had turned an enemy into a friend.